Hey everybody, this is Silver Spook, and this is the Silver Spook live stream. And so today we're going to be talking about resilience versus self-destruction, and what will become of the United States, among other things. Um, these are also screenshots from Neofeud too, so I was like, we'll just use some of the work that I have worked on for a long time. This has been last week I did a stream about Neofeud 2. Neofeud 2 deals with these topics um, pretty directly, so I thought it was worth doing a weekly video on, and kind of like going specifically into those topics of what causes or what enables certain civilizations to survive, continue, thrive, and produce peace, stability, and prosperity for the people, and which societies fail to do that and produce collapse and suffering. And also, there's a question of like, is the collapse of a society, is the collapse of a civilization that produces misery a bad thing? That's a whole nother question. So I kind of want to explore that, because it's kind of like, if obviously killing is bad, right? We can accept that, like, just murdering, killing is bad. But as a comedian, an Egyptian comedian, recently pointed out in a very hilarious interview with the British TV personality Piers Morgan, the Egyptian comedian said, killing people is bad, but if you define if you define certain people as good and certain people as bad, or intrinsically good and certain people are intrinsically evil, then the good people can never do bad, but killing the evil people is good. So then killing can be good, right? And of course, like, but that's, of course, yeah, I won't go. I don't want to go off in that direction too far, but it's kind of like, so. But similarly, right? If somebody who is a serial killer is punished for their crimes of taking the lives of innocent people, is that a bad thing or is that a good thing? Right? Because we said, well, we don't want to punish anybody. We want people to suffer. But if that, like, stops that behavior and other people from doing such behavior, is that, does that become a good thing? But and similarly, if a civilization, if a government, as part of as a manifestation of that country, society, massive human collective people, or confluences of interests in one place at one time, if the collapse of a regime that was producing misery, like, internally, there can be some violence during the collapse of any government, right? The collapse of any society will have some suffering within it, right? The people who are in power will not want to lose that power, right? Political officials, economic winners, let's say economic benefiters of a particular established system, they will not want that to change, right? But that can cause some violence internally. Some people might go to jail, be punished, or lose their lives in the collapse of their system. But if the system was if 1,000 people are having an amazing time, or even 10,000 elites, let's say, are having an amazing time in a system, but millions or even billions of people are immiserated by that system, then is the collapse, is the self-destruction of that system, right? While it will hurt the 10,000 elites, and they might lose their lives even, right? They may be beaten, they may be attacked, they may be, punished, they may be put in, they may be put in facilities where they are not allowed to move, kind of like Gaza. Well, not like Gaza, but you know what I mean. You know what I'm saying? Right? They'll be put in a non-open air prison, possibly. But is the loss of the 10,000 most privileged people in a place that benefits, hundreds of millions of people in that same country, is that a bad thing? Right? And so anyway, so that's a question, because I was thinking about this. I was reading this article about how often do you think about the Roman civilization? Well, the answer is most American, and they always ask this question to men. I think there was a podcast, right? That was several podcasts were launching that were trying to drum up some viewerships and some buzz and some virality. So they're trying to get this. Everybody asks all the men, and it's very gendered as well. Ask all the men, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? You're seeing this on social media. You're seeing this all over the place, especially in the tech world. But it's kind of like, but the answer is kind of like, I think the question should be more like, why is there so much, like, how bad is it that people are looking to the collapse of their predecessor, awaiting their current collapse? It's kind of like, it's almost it's a tacit admission that the U.S. is in situ collapse. We're in the process, right? And so people are like, men are thinking about the Roman Empire because they're trying to figure out what they can do to either, I think it's futile to stop the collapse of the United States, but that's a little bit further down the line. But it's empire certainly, but how did the people 1,500 years ago, how did the Caesars, how did the political officials, how did the Senate, how did the military, how did the people of Rome deal with the death of this massive, expansive, edifice that they had built, reaching across North Africa, all of the Mediterranean, into the Occident, or the western parts of the Eurasian continent. Now, how do they deal with that, right? So that's why people are asking that. I think that's why a lot of people are thinking about it, right? I'm making video games about the new Roman Empire and the future Roman Empire, actually. And what's that guy? There's this author. His name is I think his name is Alexander Turchin, or it's let me double check that really fast. Yeah, the end. There's this book that a lot of people are talking about, End Times, and it's also a lot of dudes in the tech circles as well. It's a very like millennial to Gen X dudes in tech circles. That's kind of the Venn diagram where a lot of these questions are being asked, because those are people that are currently running the empire, which is a patriarchal empire as well. End Times, Elites, Counter Elites, and the Path of Political Disintegration. So this is a book that was Peter Turchin. Peter Turchin is, I believe, originally Russian, but he migrated to the United States somewhere in the 20th century. Peter Turchin brings science to history. Some like it and some prefer the history plain, but everyone needs to pay attention to the well-informed, convincing, and terrifying analysis. Yeah, and so anyways, and there was the one article I was reading earlier was this Wired article. Okay, shoot, give me 1 second. And it was referenced there. Okay, if I go to the front page, I'm gonna find it. Yeah, it was. I'm not gonna be able to get the whole article, but I'm not saying you should look at this. I look at this for reference purposes. I'm saying this is a good source of information. I want to know what people that read Wired think that they should be thinking about, and what people who fund and operate Wired think people should be thinking about. Yeah, so why has climate catastrophe toppled civilizations but not others? Researchers are honing in on what helps society survive climate shocks like the volcanic eruptions that helped fell the Roman Empire or the drought that plagued the ancient Mayans, right? Um, Another famous writer in this area in the Western world is Jared Diamond. I think he wrote a book about collapse a couple decades ago. Which it comes from its own perspective, which I will leave that out for right now, because I'm trying to be more open about this. The Roman Empire fell more than 1,500 years ago, but its grip on the popular imagination is still strong. As the recent trend on TikTok evidences, women started filming the men in their lives to document their answers. Like, why? I mean, sometimes it's hard to know like why exactly trends emerge, or are they emerging, or are they being forced in? It's hard to know sometimes. Later on, you find out they're being manufactured, but there is a real reason why people will be thinking about the Roman Empire, though. I guess like technically every day. But anyways, why have climate catastrophes toppled civilizations but not others? Anyways, and so in this, they do cite that book, right? Why civilizations collapse. Long story short, one of the main reasons why civilizations collapse, he talks about, is elite overproduction. That's what, when you talk about elites meaning like the wealthiest, the most powerful, the most those who have the most resources, power, prestige, etc. in the society, right? So yeah, he's a project leader at Complexity Science Hub in Vienna. So this is definitely a Western perspective on this as well. It has to be kept in mind. Research associate at the University of Oxford, emeritus professor at the University of Connecticut, trained as theoretical biologist. He's now working in the field of historical social science that he and his colleagues call cliodynamics. I don't know if that's a reference to, I have all these videos. I think about the Roman Empire a lot because I have all these videos on that feature the Foundation series as the main thumbnail. And there's a reason I like that, because the Foundation, as I've talked about, I just made this video, so obviously I'm thinking about Rome a lot myself. I try not to spend all day thinking about Rome, right? I'm not really thinking about Rome. What I'm thinking about is empire as a whole, and Rome is just one of them. Cleon, I don't know. I'm not sure why is it cliodynamics? Actually, I'm interested. Transdisciplinary area research integrating historical macro sociology, cultural and social evolution, economic history, cliometrics, mathematical modeling of long-term social processes, and the construction and analysis of historical databases. Where is the it is a transdisciplinary study. Where does that word come from, though? Etymology. Cliodynamics is composed of Clio and dynamics. In Greek mythology, Clio is the muse of history. Dynamics, most broadly, is the study of how and why phenomena change with time. Because also the emperor in Isaac Asimov's Foundation series is a infinite recursion of galactic Caesars known as the Cleons, right? And I've talked about that a lot, so I won't continue. But I was wondering if there is a reference between cliodynamics referencing Asimov, because Asimov, as cliodynamics is about researching cultural evolution, economic history, macro sociology. It's basically the evolution and the rise and the fall, and what causes the rise and the fall of human societies, cultures, what makes things collapse. It's like they're trying to figure out, obviously in part so that you could like predict, lessen the impact of, possibly prevent the collapse of, let's say, the United States and the West, or maybe you want it to collapse, right? Or maybe you want it to collapse in a certain way, all right? Or maybe you want the empire to collapse with minimal people being killed and suffering being enacted. So, I mean, there is a legitimate reason to study this. The Chinese actually make a very big deal about this kind of thing. They don't necessarily call it cliodynamics, but there's study. A lot of what Marxist-Leninism and Marxism is analysis of the evolution, obviously particularly the class dynamics, but it's a similar study of like what causes these human agglomerations, right? These emergent phenomena of advanced civilizations to build and then fall apart, and why, right? Anyway, so another connection I just want to make is that sorry, Mike. Also, what's up, Grant? Another connection I want to make is that when Asimov, I know I talked about this before, but when Isaac Asimov wrote The Foundation, which was written in the mid 20th century, right? He was talking about the when he was describing psychohistory, right? It is psychohistory produced by Harry Seldon, a fictional character in Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. Harry Seldon describes psychohistory basically as that Clio dynamics, right? Which is the psychohistory is a effective mathematics of sociology, and the using statistical laws of mass action, it predicts the future of large populations, right? Harry Seldon, right, was also he studied the movement of large animal populations, like herds. Like there's one scene in the TV show where Harry Seldon is watching a herd of these science fictional like Pegasi. They're like flighted alien horses. I don't know if I have a video of that. And he predicts the movements so accurately. Okay, I'm not gonna be able to find it. He predicts the movements of them so accurately, right, that he's able to tell where exactly any horse is gonna be. So he stands in the middle of a stampede, and he knows exactly, how that herd will move, so he doesn't get hit, right? And then he's like, so after mastering the, creating this mathematical theory of how animals behave in large groups, then he said, well, maybe I could model how humans behave in large groups, right? And that's basically what I mean. That's a science fiction, like being able to predict such things. That's whether that functions or not. That's a science fictional book, but there are obviously areas of study for that, and in the real world, not just in the science fictional domain, right? And in fact, the inventor, right, Peter Turchin, he was formerly a researcher of animal dynamics. It's actually he's very like Harry Seldon like character, because his original thesis, his original area of study was animal predictions, animal herd dynamics, and then he moved on to humans. Anyways, and so so why? But let's get back to the point before I go off too far. So why exactly do certain civilizations collapse, right? And why would some civilizations survive, right? Well, what some of the things that he has proposed is that the main the main things are, because some people think, oh, an environmental catastrophe, right? Like volcanoes, volcanic eruptions that cause mass weather and climate alterations that impact many things, including crop failures, right? Famine, which causes societal further disruptions to the society that then hastens collapse. Or a lot of times it's described as what causes collapse, but one thing that's pointed out is actually it's not the environmental impact. Environmental shocks are important. They're like a piece of that equation of what causes the collapse, But the most important thing, and the thing that is controllable, because humans can't really control the whether a volcano erupts or not. In the right before the French Revolution, a massive Icelandic volcano produced, trillions and trillions of tons of atmospheric dust and bits of the crust of the earth, right, that caused global cooling, and then also caused crop and agricultural loss, right before the French Revolution, and so like if you look back, a lot of these environmental shocks, also pandemics, are also factored in. Those are part of another major shock that alters society in a sudden way, and then the civilization can't deal with that and then implodes. Not necessarily instantaneously, but actually the things that actually cause the civilization to fall apart are and the most human controllable parts of those as well is the elite overproduction. So that means like you have too many elite overproduction is, I don't know, I have other ways to describe it. That's the way that Peter Turchin describes it, because he's working in the West. But let's just say there's too many very wealthy and powerful and resource people, and then which is, it's another way to say that the inequality in the society has increased, right? It's basically the vast inequality in a society, very poor and then very rich, right? For example, I don't know, the average CEO of a Fortune 500 company making 600 times as much as the average person, or Jeff Bezos making 2.5 million times as much as the Amazon delivery driver, or I don't know, the Roman Caesar, having thousands of times or more the net worth of the Roman citizen and the non-Roman citizen or slave, which they had, making far less than that, right? So all of those things are aspects of, right, so that the inequality in the society, right, that then produces instability and produces upset and frustration. And then when the shock comes, right, so it's like the inequality is like, the termites eating the house, right? The termites eating the house. You haven't weatherproofed it. You you're spilling gasoline all over the place. You have dry brush around that you haven't cleared of a non-native variety, which is prone to wildfire, right? And you just, right, so the inequality is like a human caused fragilization of that civilization that is full of discontent. It is full already of unhappiness of the bottom population. And so when the society needs to pull together to weather the shock, the inequality in the society that exists, right, and the unhappiness of the majority of the population that exists, or vast sections of the population, right, especially at the bottom, right, that don't have their basic needs being met. This is true in the Roman Empire. It was right, the farmers and the people working the land at the fringes outside of the capital, right, near the arches and the fluted columns and the grapes and the wine and the big huge parties, right? But the people outside let the people of northern Europe in, because they were so upset with the way that this Roman government, the Roman elites had treated them. They said, well, just take it. We don't care. We're not going to fight. We will not fight for these people. We're not defend these people. These people are this civilization is rotten to the core. This civilization is a termite-eaten, filthy, rotten husk. If it ever was good, that's not clear. It has produced some arches, some plays and art. A lot of it was stolen from previous civilizations, though. It has a lot of wealth and gold, and there are Roman emperors that have huge statues for themselves, huge, They have huge coliseums. They have they had vast armies. But I don't know that we don't believe in this project that is Rome. And if we ever did, we definitely don't now. And so, and so, obviously, like external, external invasions by countries is one thing. Environmental shocks is another thing, right? Biological pandemic shocks is another thing. Each of these things require huge collective action to deal with, right? If your country goes to war, you can't go to war with majority of the people going, I'm not fighting for this, right? If your country has to deal with huge crop failures, right? People need to really do a lot of work and pull together, right, and sacrifice for the collective, for this collective civilization. But if the people are saying, I'm not sacrificing any for this, I don't believe in this America. Who cares about this Washington D.C. The elites in our United States Capitol do not care about us, and I don't care about it. Right? I think that's the majority of Americans actually right now. If you do, a survey says there's low 20% to teen percents for every branch of the United States right now, and their opinion of obviously the economic elites is also terrible, right? They hate you can say down with billionaires to almost anybody on any side of the aisle, and they will say, oh, obviously I hate those people, right? So there's so when they say, okay, we have to pull together to weather this famine that's hitting the United States now, right? I'm not saying that's what's happening at the moment, but I'm saying, like, if that were to come, there's no collective belief, there's no collective will, because of how poorly the elites have treated the masses of the population. During the pandemic, like, that was a major shock. That wasn't enough to fully collapse the United States yet, but it did turn a lot of people. They say again, if they weren't already, now they're suddenly turning more and more against their so-called, government, their so-called United States country, their so-called nation. They're suddenly going, we've been so let down. So many millions have died needlessly. The leadership has been so poor. It's flippity floppeting, awarding the richest. The richest got even richer than they ever were at a higher rate during the pandemic than ever. And so people could see all that happening, right? And then they see what's happening also, of course, in the response to the genocide that is being committed against Palestinians. And whatever bit of, faith in their government to even be like a moral, virtuous country. Obviously, there may be people who will say, well, I mean, I never believed, the United States has never had a conscience. But there are people it's the same way that, like, you cannot believe in God, but religion is real for a lot of people, right? You might not believe the United States is a moral place, but there are the United States being a light on the hill and a leader of what are called the free world is real in the minds of many people, mostly Westerners and mostly Americans, right? But the religious belief in the United States, if you want to put it that way, ultimately all of these beliefs are their beliefs, right? Civilizations are the product of mass numbers of humans collectively believing the same thing, right? Whether that's ideology, an economic ideology like capitalism or socialism or communism or liberalism, etc. Believing in this, what it is called democracy, right? Or at least Western democracy, right? Whether you believe in that or not, right? And the places that aren't are our enemies, and we trying to build everywhere into places like us. That legitimizes the United States for the United States population. It legitimizes their belief in their country because they can say, well, we're a democracy, and country X is an authoritarian, not democracy, right? So it's not really about the other country. It's about in the place of the United States, that's about legitimizing in the minds of Americans, right? Like I said, that's where America exists in the minds of Americans, and it's also the reality is like all nations. That includes I'm Native Hawaiian, right? So the Native Hawaiianness exists in the minds and in the in the belief of all Native Hawaiians that they are Hawaiian, right? There once was a belief in Sumeria, and people believe themselves to be Sumerians. They don't exist anymore. It's not that there wasn't a place. It's not that there wasn't a civilization called Sumeria. There was, right? But it was made up of all the people who had faith in that, right? And yeah, they had a real language and they had a real culture, and you can still study it, right? But for whatever long, it evolved into other things. It collapsed, right? Rome was a real place. There were real Romans who consider themselves part of the Roman Empire, built by the Caesars, run from Rome, right? Senatus, they had all their slogans, they had all their symbols, they had their arches, they had their bundle of sticks with the axe upon it, right? The eagle, just like America has. They had all of these things. They had their language, they had their Latin, they had their economic, oligarchic capitalism, economic ideologies. They had their political ideologies, right? The so-called democracy, the so-called Senate, which of course, like I'm not. This is not about like what we can talk about whether Roman, American, or Western democracies are really democratic at another time. But like my point is that like all those ideologies like legitimized. Oh, and democracy is good because it is just the people collectively decide how the country is run, and that is more just than a single person because of hereditary inheritance deciding, or a single person or a handful of people because of their economic privilege deciding what happens in a society. So you could argue, right? Anyway, but the again, what's important is the belief in the minds of the population, right? And so in the Roman society, they saw themselves at that level as great, as a place that you could either be proud to be from or you'd be terrified to not be from, and it had economic and social privileges and benefits to be a member of, right? And so there's some combination of both, right? There's always a, not necessarily, well, I should say, in an unjust place you need a supremacy narrative, right? That we are better than places that are not us. So Romans are better than savages, right? Those are indigenous peoples in Africa, other cultures in Asia. These places that are north, this backwaters north of Gaul, called, one day it's going to be called Britain, but those places are not as good. And so sometimes that's described as fascism, which the Romans were, and so is the United States and Israel, and so and so is the entire colonial project. But I digress. But the belief that we are better than the others is it helps to solidify the belief in that nation, right? In a very terrible way, right? Now of course, if you believe as a American or Roman or European that you are better than these other peoples across racial lines because they are African, because they are Afro-Asiatic, right? Non-Hellenistic in the case of the Greeks, after the Enlightenment, the bastard children of the Enlightenment, these social Darwinism and the biological scientific justifications for colonialism, right? Then that empowers the European, right? The European project of a planet ruled by the British, the French, etc. That is just justified by the then new sciences of evolution contorted in a particular way, right? But for the rest of the planet, right, then of course that produces, vast levels of resentment and like, right, similarly, like even like as civilizations internally can collapse, right? This is like a wider thing, a wider argument. So, an empire, which is specifically when I'm talking about that, I mean, a country, a place with a people that have some cohesion in a particular area, right? For example, Rome, or for example, Britain, who then expand with military, economic, dominational, and they're always unjust measures, to control, to extract resources, labor from external places, right? It's kind of like, in one sense, you could think about it as concentric circles. So Rome harms the inside of the Roman capital's elites, right? Were unjust to the Romans that were outside the capital in the countrysides, right? Part of how Rome collapsed. But then similarly, even beyond the countryside, you have the margins of empire, the colonies, who are even more unjustly treated. It's very much like the United States. DC mistreats the average American in Michigan or Florida, right? With $40,000 for the average family's healthcare per year, and spending $100 billion on 3 simultaneous proxy wars while there's no infrastructure. People are running out of food, and so, but in the United States, if the United States is like the countryside of Rome, and Rome, the capital center city, the hyper metropolis is DC, Wall Street, DC, Wall Street, Los Angeles, Chicago, whatever. But mostly, DC is the seat of at least the official political action. So if DC is the capital, that's harming the countryside, that is the entire United States. Like Rome is the capital, harming, the countrysides of Rome. But then outside of Rome, when you go to you go to North Africa, when you go like north into West Eurasia, where Rome had colonies, then you're going to have increasing upset and resentment towards the towards not even just the Roman capital, like yes, the Roman capital, but also all of that Rome that is doing better, right? In the same way that the people in Africa, Central South America, who are living on less than 10% of what Americans live on, who have half the country hasn't had electricity, or 80% of the country hasn't had electricity in Niger for basically forever. So even the Americans who have a blackout or two, every 6 months, some of them, depending on if you're in a more ghettoized area, you're kind of in, that's why sometimes they call it an internal colony in the black and brown and indigenous ghettos, right? The reservations and some parts of Hawaii are the worst in the United States, and in those areas, you might have I don't think it's never got quite as bad as the external colonies, certainly not Gaza, but you might have no power. You might have you might not have any power for weeks and weeks, and it might not come back. There's never been clean water in many native reservations for decades. So, and so there you have even more resentment, right, than just the average American citizen. In the same way that the average Roman citizen was upset at the capital, but then there's even more outside. And so those are like, I don't think Turchin really talks about that, as far as I know, but because you can have a civilization like the Chinese civilization, but they don't have colonies, right? You can have a civilization like the Cubans right now, right? Cubans have to struggle with COVID-19. The Cubans have to struggle with embargoes. The Cubans have to struggle. They have actually a lot of things they have to pull together to weather, right? In some ways, resisting the U.S. empire in Cuba, including 700 assassination attempts on Fidel Castro's life, and to crush the, Cuban Revolution and their socialist path. against the ideology of the capitalist American. So you see, the faith in the ideology of the country is part of what solidifies the country in the minds of the people as well. And Americans solidify their identity as we are the capitalist superpower, and capitalism is the best system, and communism is evil, and we're fighting it. We are fighting a holy war. Americans are fighting global jihad against communism. I mean, that's not fair to the people that actually are fighting in some ways, but it is a religious belief in the ultimate absolute greatness of capitalism as part of the American identity, right? That solidifies people signing up for the Cold War, people coming to from around the world to go from rags to riches in Los Angeles and New York and in the United States, right? It solidifies the belief in the country, which is what makes nations and what makes people. If you strip it all down, they're just pieces of carbon, phosphate, and nitrogen, right? Processing energy through time. There's no actual like civilization there, right? If aliens show up and they can't interpret and read everything that's happened, there's no any nation, any culture, any ideology that's not actually out there in the world. It's in the minds of all the people that are participating in the capitalism, the United States, right? And so so it's kind of like I remember like thinking that, because I remember like thinking like, where is the nation of Hawaii, right? If we're in Hawaii, we're occupied by the United States Empire. I was in college, and when we were colonized, but there's still a Hawaii here, so we're Hawaiian, but we're also American. But if nobody speaks Hawaiian, or less than 1% of the population speaks Hawaiian, then what happens to Hawaii? Where is Hawaii, right? And the answer is like, it goes extinct. It can go extinct, like Rome went extinct, right? Like there's no Sumerians left. They actually were teaching Hawaiian like Sumerian when there were less than 30 speakers of Hawaiian, when the United States almost fully genocided Hawaiians. They're still trying. Every decade, 10% of Hawaiians leave Hawaii, and we get further and further disintegrated, right? So like the Romans disintegrated. The Romans annihilated many cultures and indigenous languages in what is now France, right? In Spain, in what's now Britain. There are many cultures and different languages, and some of them are related, but they had like distinct differences between them. Like the Basque region of Spain is a mountainous region in the country of Spain, which the Romans for the part of it was the topology of the Basque region is difficult. It was difficult for the Roman army to reach, and they didn't really have a real reason to get up there and to eradicate that people, right? Or form them into Romans, and kill the resistors, right? And so the Basque region has a different linguistic history than France, the French, and the Spanish, and the English, right? Which are they have Romance. I mean, they have Roman roots, right? They have Roman languages. Roman language, the Latin, was pushed, and the Roman culture was also pushed with that into all of those places, but not in the Basque region, because of it was almost like a tsunami swept through Europe, and literally the physically highest peaks, is not because the Basque people had like, for the Scottish also were one place that resisted more than others. They didn't do so well under the English later. The English were a descendant of the Roman Empire. That's why the West thinks about Rome a lot. It's because that's the original people who wiped out whatever was indigenous about them and formed them into who they are now in many ways, right? For better or for worse, So in that sense, everyone who speaks English, French, or Spanish is a Roman, in a weird way. Obviously not literally, but in a way they have that heritage, and they behave similarly. Certainly in an economic and a political and a military and a supremacist fascist sense, the Spanish Empire, the Inquisition, the British Empire, and the brutal colonization, right? The French Empire, how they treated the Vietnamese, the people of Algeria, right? They continue. It is a continued Roman project. The Americans and how they treat the entire planet. It's a continued Roman project down to the Aquila that was on the shield of the Romans. It is on the dollars of the United States. The denarius that the Romans slice into pieces. The same strategy of mass denarius hegemony. That was the Roman currency. The Roman SWIFT system, right, was the forced usage of the Roman currency to maintain economic supremacy, economic and financial transactional supremacy, to weaponize sanctions. They didn't really call them sanctions, but the Romans forced everyone to always pay, specifically in the Roman money, which they then clipped the coins because they weren't able to, for example, with electronic systems and trillions of bits fluctuating in a server in New York, right? They couldn't print $8 trillion in a second, which is what the United States can do that, right? So the printing of $8 trillion is the equivalent of the Roman coin clipping towards the end of the empire, which is the United States is obviously, its debt to GDP is higher than it's ever been. The dollar hegemony is running out, just as the Roman denarius hegemony is running out. De-dollarization is happening, right? And as the BRICS are building new, the counter hegemonic forces are countries, Russia, China, Brazil, India. Actually, the Belt and Road Initiative includes over 75% of the countries on Earth. It is 150 countries are already in that counter-American economic alliance, so that's and so if the United States Empire it was the most powerful empire that the world has ever produced, right? In some ways, it is the ultimate Roman project, right? But like Rome, it's also it is also not very resilient, right? It is not a country, right? Cuba, I could come back to what I was saying earlier, like China, the Chinese had never really had. It's amazing that they're very unique in history because they're like the largest. They were the largest. I think India has recently slightly surpassed them in population, but they were like basically the world's largest population, the longest continuous civilization. So they're 3,500-year-old texts, right? A full 1,500 years, millennia before Jesus Christ was born, and a cross was emblazoned on a Roman shield. The Chinese have writing from that time that young Chinese people can still read. They're like a continuous civilization. Whereas in Europe, there has been explosions and collapses and wars, and the borders are, the borders of the European countries, they're fluctuating faster than the prices of NFTs and crypto. You know what I'm saying? They're so impermanent, right? They're here today, gone tomorrow. Part of that is because of the selfish, barbaric ideologies and life ways of the Westerners, where they focus on individuals, and so things explode when an individual takes all for themselves, passes away, and the next one makes it all about that new person's self, right? So whereas societies that think long term and in terms of the collective rather than just individuals, think of the common good, they tend to be more resilient, weather more crises. And there's a reason why the Chinese systems of writing, the Mandarin, they have the longest continuous system of science, technology, engineering, pandemic science. They have been through literally hundreds of pandemics, and they have meticulously written down by countless scribes in China that document every single one of those catastrophes, the agricultural famines that the Chinese have been stricken by. And it did cause collapses of certain dynasties, right? And that every single one of those has been noted for 3,000 plus years. Nothing in Europe even comes close to that, right? As Victor Hugo once said, the thieves, Britain and France, who took all there were all of the great Sistine chapels, all of the Van Goghs and the Rembrandts, all of our greatest works of literature, all of science, of philosophy, all of our greatest jewels and gold and everything that we ever have, all of Europe has ever produced, was not equivalent to what was in one palace the size of a city, one palace the size of a city in China, and thus the two thieves, Britain and France, filled their pockets, set it on fire, and ran away home with the spoils, laughing all the way. That was Victor Hugo, a European poet who visited China and watched what the Europeans were doing there. And so the reason why they had all of that is because they were a resilient, they were and they are a resilient civilization, for reasons that any I shouldn't say intelligent, but for reasons that any Westerner, any American, any person within the collective West should study, like, honestly, outside of Western sources, right? Outside of Roman sources, right? Because the descendants of Rome, they don't have anything nice to say about such societies. But anyway, I'm digressing. But I mean, there's a reason why they have a literature that you can still read, whereas the average the English speaker cannot read something from 1,000 years ago, even 500 years ago. They've changed and fluctuated through time, and their societies are constantly collapsing and just disappearing. Certainly the empires, and it's also important that, like, there, if you don't have, there's not really, you can't really even compare. You can't really, you can't really compare China to the European countries and the United States on the imperial sense, because they just don't have that history, right? Like, another example would be like indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. I mean, it's, a lot of people, don't like that, but they're certainly in North Turtle Island. The one place that you could make an argument had some similarities to previous empires might be Mayan. Even certain indigenous peoples in South America were unhappy with some of the ways that the Mayans dealt with them. And you could argue that, but for the vast majority of Turtle Island, it was basically mostly peaceful coexistence of many different peoples and languages. Certainly in North Turtle Island, the Cahokia, there are even many cities. Cahokia is just one of them. Tenochtitlan is another very important a hub of commerce and trade and exchange of knowledge and such. And actually, many of the largest American cities were built over indigenous cities, in part to erase the advanced civilizations of Turtle Island, right? And those were also not, for the most part, imperial. With certainly none of them to the extent that Rome was, Britain was, France was, and continued to be. The United States is. The Japanese certainly had that characteristic. Anyway, I'm kind of going off of the topic though. Let's come back to it. So one of the big things that makes one of the major aspects of what makes the society resilient or not is obviously the inequality in the society, right? What causes the inequality, right? That's another question, right? Why do you have suddenly a class of people who have billions of dollars while everybody else has, not enough? They were like one bill away from being homeless, and many are homeless, right? What causes that in the society? Well, that's a bigger question. But let's go down to the bottom. Another thing I wanted to bring up is that on the ecological sense, right? Even the Western, because Wired is funded by it's Condé Nast. It's a Western, corporate media, so it's not exactly. It's not going to be pro-China. 2,000 years of Chinese history, untangling the relations between climate disruptions and collapse of dynasties, have found that major volcanic eruptions, which often cause cooler summers and weaker monsoons, hurting crops, contribute to the rise of warfare but it wasn't the size of the eruption that mattered most. Dynasties survived some of the biggest climate disrupting eruptions, including the Tambora eruption of 1815 to present day Indonesia, and the Huaynaputina eruption in 1600 in what's now Peru. What matters most, the complexity science posits, is inequality and political polarization. Anyways, but let's, what can a modern world learn from, for example, the Mayan city-states of the 17th century Amsterdam? The way Digger sees it, historians can pin down the time-tested strategies as a starting point for the policies to help us survive climate change today. So one reason why people are thinking about empires, and the Romans is just one major one that collapsed, right? The British and the French had empires. The difference between the British and the French have folded into the American Empire. So the colonial, it's kind of, you can think of it as like Rome was when the West was colonizing and extracting and horribly abusing the rest of the world. And then they kind of weren't able to do that for a long time. That's kind of, the post-Roman, sometimes called the Dark Ages, etc. I know Europeans don't like that description now. From a colonized person perspective, Europe has always been the Dark Ages. It's always they've never had a light age of civilization, democracy, human rights, and actual human equality and no bigotry. There's only ever been Dark Ages. The 2020s were the Dark Ages. If you ask a Native American person, the 2020s were the Dark Ages. 1492 was the Dark Ages. We didn't really know them before that, but from what we heard, they were treating people terribly. So there's never been a light age in Europe, right? From that perspective, right? Now, from the European perspective, they like to say, well, we were just really nice farmers, during feudalism. We were just very peaceful, tranquil farmers. And then America got up to all this nasty capitalism. I mean, maybe, Britain, which is basically America, got it into this capitalism and hurt Europeans by taking our nice, environmentally sustainable feudalism and turned it into this capitalism. Right? There's some European that I've heard that narrative spun in like Sweden and Germany and France, and it's interesting. That's their perspective. That's their perspective. It's reasonable to wonder how neatly the lessons from ancient societies apply to today, when the technology is such that you can fly halfway around the world in a day and outsource the painful task of writing a college essay to ChatGPT. What can the modern world learn from, for example, the Mayan city-states of the 17th century Amsterdam? So a number of ways societies adapt to a changing environment across millennia. Migration allows people to move to more fruitful landscapes. Flexible governments learn from the past disasters and adopt policies to prevent the same thing from happening again. Establishing trade networks makes communities less sensitive to change in temperature or precipitation. Trade networks. I don't know, like what, the Silk Road? That China, much of Asia, Africa, and the indigenous Pacific peoples, like we Native Hawaiians and all of our Austronesian relatives who carried out the maritime Silk Road from Djibouti through the Indian Ocean to India, and then to the south, what's called ASEAN region now, right? So it's like, I'm going to be more nice for the moment, but I'm just saying, if you talk about trade networks, that's what it was. It was a resilience network. It was an anti self-destruction network in that sense, right? The Silk Road. And so the Belt and Road Initiative, which is established along the Silk Road, is about restoring mass collective resilience and collective common prosperity in the face of disasters, right? I believe it was the Greek, right? Speaking of the Romans' predecessor, the Greeks, that gave us Aristotle, and also had a capitalist oligarchy with the women and the non-Hellenic peoples enslaved. But I digress. But the Greeks, who were predecessors of Italy, at least Yanis Varoufakis he heads the DM25 movement, Democracy in Europe movement, and at least he did have the common decency to say, right, it's actually getting away from the Western Euro-Roman project. He said, he was asked, what, don't you think it's a problem that there's so many African and Muslim and Asians migrating into Greece, right? For example, across the waters between you and Turkey. Isn't that a problem? That so many Africans and Asians are coming into Europe? Aren't you upset and afraid of that? And Giannis said, no, the African civilizations and African peoples and Asian peoples coming to Greece has been the case for a long time, right? And Europeans were enriched, and Greek civilization was enriched and empowered and became smarter and more interesting because of the African and Asian movement through and exchange with the Greek people, right? Most of the Europe is not prepared to admit that. That's why what's happening in Gaza is happening. That's why Ukraine. That's part of what Ukraine is about. That's also what colonization in Africa has been about. And so, you can't say that though in Brussels. You can't say that though in universities in the West. You can't talk about we Americans and Europeans should welcome Muslims with open arms into Europe, into America. We should welcome Central and South Americans into America. No, Biden is doing Trump. Biden is doubling the Trump wall. He's like building a Trump wall and starting a Taiwan, Ukraine, and Israeli $100 billion proxy war, total war fund, right? Biden is like two Trumps. I don't really care that much about what pretends to be a democracy in U.S. politics, but that is the case. That's what's happening, right? So, let me come back to this. So societies have a greater the societies that have greater socioeconomic equality, or that at least provide support for their poorest people, are more resilient, right? So obviously, right? And so again, right? So that's what social democracy is about: maintaining empire by increasing the resilience of the United States, right? By giving, at least some measure of a reasonable life for the mid 20th centuries that made people in the United States and Europe less likely to, right, overthrow their governments and overthrow their countries and collapse during the 20th century. But the global South, right? So the global majority, 90% of the world, Africa, what they call the third world, right? What the Kennedys, right, and what the Nixon would call the third world. The people that were not, right, Russia, the Soviet Union, or the U.S. plus Europe and Japan, and then South Korea. So those places that were, Africa, most of Africa, Asia, Latin America, that's most of the world, right? They were not given, right? So they were all extremely poor, right? They were extremely poor, and they were ruled under the U.S. empire. And so, that's something that's not factored in here, right? Because we don't talk about the, we don't talk about cross country. It is not a planet-wide country to country relationship discussion. And if a country controls another country, right? Because the thing is, you could have extreme poverty in an African country, but the government might stay in place because the United States funds, operates, and programs that government and arms it to the teeth to suppress the population. Like, I don't know, the one in Israel, or that's suppressing another subaltern people, right? South Korea, Israel, Ukraine, all of these would have collapsed without the backing of the United States and its Western allies, right? So, but that's where also Turchin is white supremacist, in a sense, and Western supremacist, because he's talking about countries that are historically colonizer or imperial. He's not talking about the ones that are outside, that are in the periphery, that are subjugated, right? And so that's actually, so if you don't take into account colonialism and imperialism, then there are things that your predictions are going to miss, right? Because you're only looking at what made Rome collapse, right? What's causing unrest in London, right? Why is Washington, D.C. having 10,000s of people coming out for Palestine, right? Why are people unhappy in Tokyo, right? But that's actually, right? right? It's arguable whether any of those have been civilizations, or are they professional thieves that stole everything they knew from indigenous people of Turtle Island, Africa, and Asia, and have been riding on the coattails of that ever since, right? So I don't know if those. So that's a whole other. I don't know if the United States counts as a civilization. I'm still not entirely convinced that the United States, and part of me is like, I'm not entirely sure that any European country counts as a civilization, right? Otherwise, why is the United States and all of the European allies 100% behind genocide? And as soon as they start losing their colonies, their countries are unable to sustain even basic living standards for Americans and many Europeans, right? So without the African colonies, without Niger's uranium, France cannot sustain itself, right? That's why they're trying to. The French military is being sent into West African countries who are getting their asses kicked, by the way, or they're being pushed out even still, right? Because the African people have said we've had enough. And without the Americans extracting wealth from, Asian labor, minerals from South America, right? The Belt and Road, Chinese-led Silk Road is empowering African, Asian, Latin American countries, so they don't have to they don't have to have the resources stolen by the United States through IMF, World Bank, et cetera, right? Or just forced military takeovers, right? AFRICOM, the Indo-Pacific Command, right? U.S. is decommissioning its aircraft carrier, so it can't. Its dollar hegemony is running away. So I don't think Western countries have ever really been civilizations from that perspective, because without the constant theft from the 90% of the world for centuries, Britain, France, Germany, Austria, the United States, Canada, etc., they could not sustain and feed, and certainly not maintain cities, electronic and rail networks. They could not maintain the roads. They want to say Rome built the roads. Like Piccadilly Circus in Britain is a multi-thousand-year-old remnant of the Roman Empire that extracted wealth and labor and slaves from that entire region that's now Europe. So the Europeans repeated that process, right, through the feudal era and then through the colonial era. But without the constant influx, right, of silver from Bolivia with enslaved indigenous people being thrown down a mine to their death by Spaniards, without the a billion Indian people in India being subhumanized by the British, right, farming opium, having their agricultural and minerals and resources stolen by the British Empire doesn't exist. London doesn't exist, right? So from you can see, like, from one perspective, how can we stop the collapse of London? All right, this is where the question is the collapse of Western civilization a bad thing? Is the sustaining of even 1 million British people in London, and now it's arguable whether the British actually like London, is the sustainment of even 50, 60 million people in Britain, and by extension, right, is the sustaining of a middle class existence for some of the 50 million people, 60 million people in Britain worth the immiseration of billions of Asians and Africans and people around the world, right? I think that the collapse of the British Empire, is a good thing from that perspective, right? Is the sustainment of a handful of billionaires in the United States, and maybe I think that, maybe the upper 50% of the United States that has somewhat of a decent lifestyle, is the sustainment of 150 million Americans worth the subjugation of planetary war and extraction of literally this entire Earth? Is it worth the 60 million displaced Muslims in Iraq, from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, right? Is it worth the subjugation, the continued forced underdevelopment of Africa, and where people have no electricity and they're still living, with no roads, in poverty, dying in mass, right? Forced into, just horrible conditions by the United States, bombed back into the Stone Age, and now there are slave markets by the U.S. and France and NATO's actions in Libya, right? I think that the collapse of the West, the so-called Western capitalist free world, is the greatest thing. That's like that's like the greatest thing that could ever happen. For the action, now that's not going to be fun. For the thing is that actually will benefit the majority of the people in the United States over the long term, right? Because even the people in the United States, with the exception of maybe the top 10%, who still have a somewhat decent lifestyle, you're talking about people who are like corporate lawyers for Apple and higher. If you're like a maybe upper level, because it drops. Even the average college professor, right? 60% of college professors are food insecure. So even being a college professor, that's not high enough. That's not high enough on the centurion ranks, right? College professor, that's not enough to afford you a decent life in the United States. So, even Hollywood star, as we learned in the SAG-AFTRA and WGA strikes, that's not enough to earn you, right? Most 85% of actors in Hollywood live at a poverty level, less than $27,000 a year. They can't even qualify for health insurance, right? So the collapse of the United States regime actually would benefit at this point the majority of people in the United States. Obviously, if it leads to something better than what it currently is, right? The United States is currently pushing the entire planet to nuclear annihilation by funding and arming Israel and giving it carte blanche to engage in all-out war, genocidal war in Gaza, which would likely result in Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran coming into that. Turkey has said they would back all of those nations in a war with Israel. Every single one of them has reasons to fight that. And Pakistan said they would supply nuclear weapons to Turkey. And even before that, the Russians have already said that the Russians will not allow a all-out ethnic cleansing of Gaza. And the United States is sending its aircraft carriers there. So anyway, long story short, that's that. So from a planetary perspective, the United States could end all people. Like there's no actual. This is the thing about when you do statistical science, which is when you're basing it on the numbers of the past, historic examples. You also have to project into the future, which is something that I try to do with Neofeud and Neofeud 2. As Scott Atran pointed out in a conference, this is like somewhat off topic, but not fully. Scott Atran is a anthropologist, and who was, and I believe, I'm not sure if he's actually, I'm sure what his actual background is, if he is actually Muslim or not, but he does speak Arabic, and he is like closely affiliated with many peoples in that part of the world. But he gave this discussion that actually, like, if you look at, he actually discussed why terrorism. This is kind of now we're coming off of the resilience topic a little bit, but I want to talk about this just briefly. In this presentation, right, all of the scientific community were basically almost unanimously in the mid 2000s. This is and by extension the university system, right? The intellectual elite of the United States, biologists, neuroscientists, astrophysicists, right? They were all unanimously behind eliminating Muslim countries. Really, that's what actually was being called for. Scott Sam Harris, right, famous for. At that time, he wrote, I think he wrote, was it The God Delusion, or was that the other atheist horseman of the apocalypse? I can't remember if that was Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris. But, there was these books that are basically atheist books arguing against the abolishment or trying to eradicate religions in this time. And anyways, and so Scott made a point. I said, like, he basically said, like, all of you scientists, you are listening to news reports, right, which are funded by corporate media, which follow a power law distribution, which says that 90%, almost all news reports are, created and produced by the tiny handful of people, and almost all of it is bullshit, right? And you are all listening to that, and you are you're not doing science. You are all leading scientists in your field, but you are telescoped on your individual projects because you can't do science if you're not hyper focusing specifically on, the inner workings of, the limbic system of the human brain with the hippocampus, or the specific spectrums of light emitted by, gamma ray bursts. If you're an astrophysicist, you have to be hyper focused on that, right? And when you look at these bigger picture issues, right, all of the academic community were basically saying we need to eradicate Muslims. It's pretty amazing, actually. Part of it, there's a real reason for that. It's, there's long, deep-seated and imperial reasons for that. But the amazing thing is that the so-called intellectual elite were unable to, do the rational thinking that ostensibly Western universities are supposed to prepare you for. That's not actually true. They prepare you. They compartmentalize the scientific thinking into specifically the areas such as, those specific technical areas. But when it comes to thinking about the most important things, right? Your whole society, your country, your economic situation, right? Your country that has a military that could destroy the world and cause mass suffering, right? People are completely irrational. Even the scientists, even the best scientists, absolutely irrational, easily misled by simple, easy to look up information. You can even Google a lot of this stuff easily now. Even then, you could look it up. But the reality is that that's, I mean, and this is another problem that, is the belief in your own rationality, the belief in your own, right? And it's another religion, right? The religion of scientism means, people who like to think they're scientists, but, the belief in the absolute unimpeachable rationality of Western thinking and Western liberals who tend to espouse that, right? As, we are smarter and better than irrational, Republicans or less educated people, red states, right? People that aren't from the elite parts of New York and Los Angeles, right? The university campuses, unfortunately, right? We are above those less educated people, and we cannot be incorrect because, well, I would not be awarded with a PhD. I would not be awarded with all of these amazing science, accolades, Nobel Peace Prizes, right? I would not have these magna cum laude from Stanford or Harvard or whatever if I wasn't one of the most rational, one of the best, fact-based, right? If I wasn't a master of finding the truth, I would not be awarded with this degree. And basically, Scott said, you're all fakes, and you are irrational, and you just don't want to. You can't admit that. The way that you're functioning is fundamentally irrational. I mean, outside of your hyper specific domains, you are not capable. You obviously have proven yourselves incapable of functioning rationally, and you are going along with anti-Muslim propaganda to foment the Iraq war on terrorism, to back Israel, which you all do. That's why universities are punishing students en masse, right, for backing Israel, for standing with Palestine, right? It's important to note this is the universities. This is not just neocons with a investment into Lockheed Martin. Universities, intellectual think tanks of all of them, the greatest so-called intellectuals, right, who know all the big words, right, write all the fancy articles, who write all the big long books, including, right, the one we're just looking at. And that's why I say, even though the Peter Turchin book it's better than a lot of them, it is polluted by the Western necessary system of disinformation that maintains colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. Anyway, I'm kind of a little bit spiraling out of the topic, I know. But my point is that Scott also brings up the fact that there is technically less violence in Europe and the United States after World War II, right? Because people like to point to, well, the success of capitalism and Western democracy is saying that lives are getting better, infant mortality is down, everything is on a trajectory towards better and better prosperity and peace, and everything is just getting better all the time, right? Under our Western democratic liberal capitalism, right? But then it's like, number one, the suffering hasn't gone down. It's actually increased in the non-West, Africa, Asia, Latin America. That's most of the world. Number two, the outbreaks, the United States and the West is pushing towards nuclear outbreak and large scale total war. The Middle East, even if it doesn't go nuclear, this could be a huge, massive outbreak of war on top of all the other wars that they've already started and pushed there. And so also as the probability of war gets higher, I mean, as the initial incidences of violence, maybe not as large in the last 50 years, arguably, the next outbreak of violence could be the end of all life on Earth. So you can't really, there's nothing that can really plot, right? There's not like a line that you can plot to extinction of the human species, right? And that's a long point to say that looking at the collapse of individual countries, coming back to the original topic, right? Looking at the collapse of individual countries is not sufficient, right? I think it's not sufficient when you have a globally interconnected civilization, when you have a planet-wide human, not necessarily global civilization. When humanity is globally interconnected, globally able to wipe its entire self out in an instant, right? You can't just look at individual countries and say, why did this metropole rise and fall, right? Why did London, do this, right? Why did Sumeria do that, right? You do have to factor in the new realities that are qualitatively different in some ways from the old realities. Like, you can learn from the old realities, but you also have to be up to date on what's also happening. So anyways, okay, let's finish though, because it's 12:21. Okay, let's move to. I forget how. I think I talked about a lot of stuff I wanted to talk about, but this is a screenshot from Neofeud 2. If you are tuning in, one thing that was brought up in that Wired article, just to come back to that, is that the food, right? The food situation, environmental situation, right? Because if the ecological changes, right, cause a lot of these collapses, ecological natural disasters like volcanic eruptions that cause mass crop failures due to environmental changes. Climate change is an unprecedented global, massively devastating event, right? Like a volcanic eruption can be locally, right? Yeah. So it actually says collapse itself could be considered an adaptation to particularly dire situations. There's a general idea that collapse is scary and that it's bad and that's what we should avoid. But there's a lot of truth in that, especially because collapse involves violence and destruction and unrest. But if the way your society is set up is making everyone's lives miserable, they might be better off with a new system. I mean, obviously, right? So I'm going to go and say, well, yeah, Hawaii would be better off. Palestine would be better off. Africa, Asia, and Latin America, which is 90% of the world, would be better off without the collapse of the American empire and all of its allies in Europe and Japan, which are all propped up and hoisted up by the American empire, which is the legacy of the last 5 centuries of European colonialism, right? So that's clear, right, to me. I mean, it may not be clear to Americans, some of them, but that's clear to most of the world, right? That's why they're going with the Belt and Road Initiative. That's why they're working with BRICS. That's why Africa and Russia are having closer and closer coordination, and China and Africa are having closer and closer coordination, and the Argentinians are trading yuan for BYD vehicles, Argentinian currency directly for BYD vehicles, which are electric cars that are 4 times cheaper than Teslas. And the Chinese electric car is about to surpass globally the so-called greatest American future forward product that is car. Cars are actually, for better or for worse, they are a large. They're one of the. They are a key indicator for the advancement of a civilization because of the kind of supply chains, industry, education, technical expertise you need to be making those, right? Japan was surpassed by China, and now the United States will be very shortly. And the Chinese also, they don't only have cars, they also have trains, the best in the world. Blow everyone else out of the water, the high-speed rail. Apparently, I just learned that goats can ride for free. Goat herders can take all their goats on the Chinese trains. They have like special trains that they help the goat herders like move the goats around. The U.S. doesn't have any functional trains that will kill people and blow up and poison East Palestine. Never mind Palestine. Anyways, so living through a period of societal class might feel less different than you might imagine, just like living through a pandemic did. Possibly less like a zombie movie, more like a boring everyday life once you get accustomed to it. Okay, let's move down though. British Isles became. So interestingly, archaeological evidence shows that after the Roman Empire lost control of the British Isles, people became larger and healthier. Right? So again, right? Even Britain, the British people, the people in the British Islands, they're not British the way we think of them now, but the people in the British Islands got healthy, like physically their bodies got bigger and they got healthier because they weren't suffering under the Romans. I predict that the size of Asians and Africans, people in Central and South America and the Pacific, especially in the most impoverished areas, they were suddenly, when archaeologists look back a century or 5 centuries from now, right, or aliens or whoever looks back, I predict that they will suddenly discover that 7 billion people on the earth suddenly got healthier and larger and stronger and had better lives after the collapse of the West, the Star-Spangled Roman Empire, which will be the last empire, because people will be too educated, too smart, and too well informed by the non-Western controlled Huawei phones and with joint Chinese, Russian, and African produced 6G lines and satellite systems. They will be too well educated to ever be misled into the imperial death loop again, right? I mean, that's a conjecture. You can call me in 2 centuries, see if that works out. But I predict when people look back, they'll see everybody suddenly got better off. These peoples of Niger and Mali and Burkina Faso and these areas of Africa, they suddenly were able to read at a much faster rate because they didn't have to only use candlelight, and they weren't starving. They weren't starving while they were trying to read, like they are all over Africa because of Europe and the United States, right? So over time, you're gonna find, wow, there were so many improvements. You can even see it by inspecting the bones of the peoples of Africa and Asia. We can actually see in their bone structure they got bigger and healthier. Afghanistan, people are like 6 feet, tall on a regular basis. People suddenly, you see all of these bones without, the indicators of malnourishment in the bones of Syrians and Iraqis. The Palestinians, you look in their bones. Oh my God, the children. Suddenly, at one point, half the population was they died before they turned, 30. Half the population is under 16 in Palestine, right? In Gaza. And then suddenly, everyone was living like 80, 90 years, right? And so most of the world then suddenly improves, right? So the reality is that like the collapse of an unjust civilization is not necessarily a bad thing. That's why I said, the United States, U.S. empire balkanizing, fracturing, collapsing. Oh, great, awesome. You just have to control how it collapses. Hopefully it doesn't collapse in a bad way, but it has to collapse. Okay, let me find the environmental one though. Yeah, ecologists analyze the rise and fall of the pine beetle population. Okay, no, I'm not gonna be able to find it. But I mean, what I want to talk about at the very end is that one just another way in which resilience is built, right, is through food security. And so for example, in Hawaii, um, like in Palestine, the the Israelis prevent the Israelis regularly bulldoze the olive trees, olive orchards. Palestine is known for its olive oil. It's one of its most important exports. And so to prevent economic activity, to starve the population, and also just literally to starve the population, the Israelis regularly bulldoze and fill concrete um they fill concrete into the wells in Palestine to stop people from getting water to drink, so they become dehydrated and wither away faster. And also, right, they do that to prevent irrigation, right, to stop the olives from growing, right. So it's about starving Palestinians, and it's also about preventing them from doing any economic activity to empower them as well. This is what the United States did. This is the same thing as what happened on Maui, in fact, right? So let me just come back to that real fast. So I also have my whole long thread on that, right? Yeah. So yeah. So the same. Yeah. How is privatized? All of Maui's water, or mass amounts of Maui's water, is being taken away from Native Hawaiians who lived in Lahaina in Maui was actually a capital, right, of the of Hawaii, right? And so I'm trying to find it. This is not the one I want. Trying to find the one that I want. Yeah. Yeah. So big corporations, real estate, and tourism are snatching water from us Hawaiians. They've already took much of the water to stop us from doing our sustainable agriculture, to stop us from being able to feed ourselves, using all the water on golf courses. 10% of all water in Hawaii is used on golf courses. And then after that, it's mega resorts, and it's being taken away. The reason why, Lahaina was dry, right? And what Hawaiians are trying to do is we're trying to restore the Ahupua'a system of ecological land and resource maintenance that kept all of the mountainous and the midland and the coastal regions in Hawaii green and very productive, right? With minimal interference for centuries and centuries, and fed everybody. Hawaii also fed everyone in Hawaii plus California, right? Millions of pounds of bananas and sugar, or not sugar, but bananas and sweet potatoes and other products, breadfruit, was sent to California to feed California. So Hawaii was actually one of the most productive places in the entire world before the U.S. coup and the U.S. empire entered Hawaii. And so my point is that so keeping the environment green, keeping the plants and the forest and the food forests thriving. Not only does that limit climate change, because actually deforestation is one of the number one leading causes of global climate change. Desertification obviously exacerbates wildfires. As areas dry up, creates more. Areas that dry have an exponential an exponential feedback loop of making areas even more dry. So dry areas become drier, right? So you have to kind of kickstart and push. You have to really fight to desertified places, and places that are desertify even more rapidly, right? So by because green and forests and plants, they draw moisture to them, right? And they have this tendency to kind of spiral into wetter and wetter at a certain point. And so anyway, so long story short, coming back to this one. So Hawaii we were in Palestine to support the native people there in their own resilience, right? By trying to plant, we planted 300 olive trees in Palestine, and native Hawaiians we are protecting our sacred mountain, and the Palestinians also showed up for us as well. So let me see if I have that quote where what in our struggle against the United States, right? This is from Havani. Havani Rios is a musician in Hawaii who has been to Palestine. This message right there is directly to Hawaii and all those who have ever supported the Protect Mauna Kea movement. When we made the call for the world to turn their eyes to our Mauna, Palestine showed up with solidarity and ho'okupu. Do not forget that. And so this is a picture from, this is in Palestine where we are opposed to, so this is from Pu'uhuluhulu. We are opposed to the annexation and occupation of Palestinian land. In this photo, Punahele is presenting the Palestinian flag on the ala as a former Hawaii delegate in a Hawaii-Palestine youth exchange. I'm sorry, this is on Mauna Kea, where we had Hawaiians who went to Palestine to help them with their food security, planting trees for them, and then came back to Hawaii. And the Palestinian flag was given to Hawaii in solidarity on Mauna Kea. So and you know, obviously this other image, this is the actual Palestinians in Palestine supporting us in our struggle, right? In their olive tree orchard that we helped to plant, that the Israelis are blowing up and bulldozing. Anyway, so long story short, so the ability to feed, right, the environmental shocks that cause the collapse of crops and agricultural decline, is something that as indigenous peoples, right, because it also that counts for empires, but it also counts for native peoples, right? In order for any people as nations imprisoned within settler colonial nations, Palestine and Hawaii under U.S. settler colonial occupation by the United States, Palestine under is U.S.-backed Israeli settler colonial occupation, right? So then trying to feed yourself, right, and then the empire, United States, taking our water away, right, causing the wildfire, which is part of what caused the wildfire. I'm trying to find my original thread. I don't know why I can't find it. I have a whole entire thread. I know I can't find it. Yeah, tourists are wandering through the burned communities, right? We suffered lost homes and family history. The United States also has caused mass burnings in Chinatown, which destroyed all of our entire nexus of businesses and homes there. And during the wildfire, part of the reason that one thing that caused the wildfires, right, is the dryness, right? The dryness in that area, which was caused by the ecological, targeted ecological devastation to basically starve out Hawaiians, right? And then also exacerbate the desertification of the Lahaina is what is a major part of what exacerbated the wildfires, on top of the climate change that makes generally the world more vulnerable to fire, massive, easily flammable, invasive grasses, dried out trees, right? All of that, the changing climate is just one of many things that's caused by Western capitalism that is overusing all the resources, and the U.S. military is the number one emitter of carbon in the world, and so yeah. So long story short, all of the when we as native nations try to build resilience, right? And also, like, reforestation is just good for the world. It's good for everyone. It's good. Reforestation is good for the environment for all people, right? When native people protect the lands and the ecology in the United States, that helps Americans who will benefit from less wildfire, less desertification, right? The Amazon rainforest is only defended. It's literally wherever indigenous people have control over the land is where the Amazon has not been cut down and destroyed and burnt, right? Bolsonaro, backed by the United States, right? Who put him in power, he proceeded to increase the burning and mass deforestation in the Amazon, and also has said we should genocide indigenous people in Brazil, right? So from an ecological standpoint, right, native people we're trying our best to be as resilient and also environmentally sustainable as possible, which involves taking care of the land, taking care of the plants and the ecology, taking care of the plants and the animals as well, which includes also keeping, of course, the predator animals and certain animals in control, and utilizing all of the food of nature in a equitable and sustainable way, unlike Western big monocropping and factory farming, etc. And so, anyway, and so just one more thing I wanted to bring up on that. So between 1978, so the United States has caused a 17%. I was trying to get some numbers, but on the environmental resilience, the United States has caused a 17% decrease, a net decrease of 17% of tree cover. So basically, the forests have declined. 7.2% of the U.S. has lost its forest. Right, some of it's in wildfire, and this year there's record wildfires that are blowing off. All previous wildfires look like nothing compared to the total wildfires. Even up to this point in the year, it's surpassed everything that's ever come before it. From 2013 to 2022, 80% of tree cover lost in the United States occur within the natural forest, equivalent to 6.32 gigatons of CO2 emissions, right? So by contrast, so again, so the United States is not only becoming more and more fragile, collapse prone because of its economic inequality, right? But the environmental hazards, which includes fire hazards, right? 30,000 people, I forget the total number, right? In Canada, in the Northwest Territories, I was just reading this article, there are like tens of thousands of people in one area were displaced by mass, unprecedented scale of wildfires that like basically burned their entire city of tens of thousands of people, just gone, right? I mean, luckily, I don't think there was no mass death. We probably would have heard about that. They got evacuated, but their whole city is gone. And these events where entire towns and cities are just being wiped out by the fires. It's happening at an increasing rate in the United States and in Western countries as a whole, right? Now let's and the continued loss of the forest is only accelerating that, right? Because the forests don't just dry out and then they disappear and they just become sand, right? The forests, as they dry out, they increase, the carbon scrubbing trees increase the total carbon in the atmosphere. The loss of the trees are also kindling that can be set on fire and then burn down your entire town and city and then cause more displacement, which impacts the rest of the society that can't handle all of these refugees coming out of all the wildfire prone areas, right? Where housing is already tight. Now, let's look at what China's doing. China's forest area increased by over 22 million hectares in the past decade. So just to put that into perspective, let's just watch this quick video. So in 2022, a land greening report was released by the National Forestation Committee General. March 12 marks the 45th China Arbor Day. According to the report, China made remarkable progress in land greening last year as the country has replanted 3.83 million hectares of trees and 3.21 million hectares of grass. So the key takeaway here, right? 1.85 million hectares of desertification land was fixed. 2 satellite remote sensing images from 2010 and 2021 show the striking difference in the green space. So what you can see, so not only can you see the Great Wall of China from space, you can see the regreening China. You not only can you see one of the oldest archaeological structures, the oldest literature, the oldest civilization in the world, one of the most resilient places in the world. I mean, historically, like again, they have a 3,500 years of at least continued language that you can read what was written, you know, like 3 millennia ago. If you are educated in China, you can't say that for basically any other people in the world. English students can't read what was written 6 centuries ago. The people, in most of Europe, they can't. The European civilizations don't even go back that far, right? They're too busy burning themselves down all the time and fighting ridiculous, needless wars over variants of the Christianity plague and fighting over who gets to kill and crush the rest of the planet. But in China, they have actually regreened 24%. The forest coverage is at 24%, which is up from 8.6% in 1949. From 1978 to 2023, China's forest coverage rate increased by more than 10 percentage points, the fastest in the world. So, as China is increasing green and forest coverage, the United States is desertifying. Right? So you can even there you can this has been a long system. It's been a long process, but it is not stopping. It's actually increased every year. The Chinese are actually increasing how much they're regreening. They are the number one in reproducing solar panels. They're like the world's leading solar. They produce more than half of all the solar panels in the world. They lead in the technology, like not only the production but also in the invention. You know, they're ahead in basically everything. I talk about this all the time. But it's not just about tech, because having access to advanced technology and industry does not necessarily make you a great civilization. The United States, the British Empire had access to great, the British had naval ships that very advanced cannons, right? The British and the French, they had cities and electrical lights. Hawaii had them before. Hawaii had a higher literacy rate and more advanced technology than even Europeans and Americans, right? So the Europeans were advanced relative to Africa and a lot of Asia, but Hawaii surpassed them, and that's why they destroyed Hawaii, because the Europeans can't handle brown people surpassing them. But the Europeans had advanced electrical lights, they had cities, they had industry, but they had that cities and those lights and those British Navy warships and cannons at the expense of billions of people around the world, right? The Chinese have developed better literacy rates, better electricity, and internet and 5G coverage. The Chinese have the greatest world poverty alleviation scheme. They are the number one. They are leading. They have more white papers in every area. Quantum computing, biotech, space, AI. Renewable technology, everything. They lead. Transportation. They're just. Europe is a joke at this point. It's always been a joke, but now the punchline is hitting home. So is the United States as a Euro-American colony. The Chinese, so the Chinese have built that without extracting all their resources from any other place, right? In fact, the Chinese have gifted tens of billions of free loans, just completely forgiven. When was the last time the United States just forgave 10 billions of loans to Africa and gave them free stuff without benefiting themselves way more, right? Never. When was the last time France forgave loans to develop Algeria or, I don't know, Niger, right? Never happened. Because the Europeans don't know how to not be criminals. The Europeans Europeans and Euro-Americans and Euro settlers, that includes Israelis, they're all Euro settlers. They don't know how to be a civilization. They only know how to be fraudsters and criminals and liars, cheaters and stealers and killers. And then they build one Big Ben and they build one Eiffel Tower after destroying the greatest civilizations in the world, stealing everything from the Summer Palace, and they build like a little joke palace, right? So the reality is the world is returning to the natural equilibrium where the advanced civilizations, right, like China and the great nations of Africa that were subjugated over centuries and will come back again. and much of Asia will be returning, and the evidence and the resiliency of the West is dropping, right? The thing is, China is also having wildfires. China's also having floods, right? But when the wildfires and floods happen, right? When the floods happen, the Chinese the PLA troops are the Chinese People's Liberation Army, and the people of China are immediately coming to the aid, right, of the citizens, right? What is the United States doing, right, in Maui, right? Stealing all of people's homes when they're in trouble. What does the U.S. do in Hurricane Katrina? Steal everybody's homes and put everybody out and leave everybody to rot during the hurricane. What are they doing in Puerto Rico, right? When disasters happens in the West, the rich use the shock doctrine, disaster capitalism, steal everything, and everyone gets more fucked. When disasters happens in China, everyone pulls together and they get stronger because everybody cares about each other, right? The world sees that. The Africa, Middle East, everybody can see what's happening there. They understand. They see the United States blowing up, backing a genocide in Palestine. They can see the United States backing Nazis in Ukraine. They can see the United States, right, beating up and brutalizing their populations, building cop cities after Black Lives Matter to kill and suppress poor and black and brown people. So the illegitimacy of the already known illegitimate West increases day by day. They can see that you're getting more burned and ecologically destroyed, and allowing that to happen. Selling off water rights to giant, needless TSMC chip reshoring, quixotic failed hopes, right? Using already desertified regions that water, like the Colorado River, to try to build chips because you want to start a unhinged proxy war on China. And you think that you can somehow blow up the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturers but you see how, and then you can't do that because your American workers are too lazy and racist to make 7-nanometer chips. So that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate for the U.S. empire, but at the same time, right? If an unjust empire collapses and a tiny handful of 1% people lose a lot, but the 99% in that country and the global majority suddenly has a better life, then the collapse is actually not a bad thing, right? And that includes if the United States collapses, and there was actually this article, I meant to talk about it all the time, but Canada has actually admitted it, that where was that? Where was that? There's so much Gaza stuff. I lost all of it. Yeah, infrastructure in Canada is known to be a security threat. Right, Agent NDN is an indigenous, a fellow indigenous influencer and academic, I believe, an activist. The Canadian Security Intelligence Services has warned Inuit leaders that foreign adversaries could gain a foothold in Canada by offering to fill infrastructure gaps in the north. The Northwest Territories have just seen record wildfires that have burned their entire towns down. Right, no help from Canada, no help from the Canadian government. The imperial genocidal Canadian government. The lack of infrastructure in native areas is abominable, right? So it's something like, I forget the boil water advisories. So long-term drinking water advisories, right? So boil water advisories have been the case for indigenous communities. First Nations communities, right, have had, many of them have never had clean drinking water. The water has come out like black or brown, smelling like, feces and liquid Drano. It's disgusting, right? And so this is a known problem. The economic situation for indigenous communities has always been forced underdevelopment, right? So, and this is what I've said all along. The communities of the United States that are the most in need and impoverished will get their infrastructure first. Likely. And the way that Americans will finally have a Build Back Better plan is when the United States, and the people in the U.S. and Canada join the Belt and Road Initiative. When the U.S. and Canada, let's just say when their regimes collapse and they can find a way to become not imperial, barbaric, lying, cheating, stealing killers, then infrastructure will begin to be built. But then the roads and the housing and the healthcare will start coming back to the people who don't have it now, right? But as that happens, the indigenous communities in northern Canada, I predict that, like I've said before, if Native people want to have their actual needs being met where they aren't, the Chinese will help. I think a Chinese and indigenous collaboration that's where it's going to happen. The Canadian government has no claim to the unceded territories of the Wet'suwet'en, the Gidimt'en, many others, right? The sovereignty of the Canadian regime is illegitimate. They have Sig Heiling Nazis in their parliament on a regular basis, with all parties, all politicians celebrating known genocidal murderers. And the Canadian government also backs current day genocide of Palestinians by Israel. So Canada is an illegitimate government. The people who lost tens of thousands of homes this year know that. The indigenous people know that. So the Belt and Road Initiative will be coming through Canada very soon, I predict, in fact. And the Chinese Wet'suwet'en partnerships, Chinese and First Nations Inuit partnerships will begin the end of the illegitimate settler colonial project of Alaska, all of Canada, and huge swaths of the United States. Now, what will Palestine become? Will it be a two-state solution? Will it all just become Palestine? How will the fascist country of the people in Israel integrate back in, right? Like the end of the Civil War and the abolition of the abolition of full chattel slavery in the United States, right? Now the thing is, it's going to be difficult because of course black people were still oppressed, and after the abolition of slavery and all the way to this day, right? Economic and continued policing oppression is not going to end just because you end apartheid, like in South Africa, like in Palestine. So what the United States looks like during this process, unknown. But what we do know is that now if the American population and the Canadian population can get it together, right, and build a regime that is not, right, destroying their own people, like in the picture on the right side of this Neofeud 2 screenshot, maybe this could go a different way, right? If the United States government and the Canadian government become legitimate democratic governments, right, that don't support Nazis, that don't have billionaires taking everything while the people have nothing, that are not racist projects, that actually give quality life and sovereignty to indigenous peoples and give full equality to black people and other indigenous and brown people. If the United States and Canada can stop supporting imperialism and Nazis and horrors around the world, then what that government of whatever the United States, doesn't really matter what it's called, right? Whatever that government or governments, right? The federated former United States, the federation of the Anishinaabe, the Sioux, and the Lakota, that now used to be the United States. Whatever, it doesn't really matter exactly what the name is, but the legitimate democratic, resilience governments of what's called U.S. and Canada, if they choose to work with they could choose to work with the Belt and Road Initiative, and then maybe that's a different path, right? But at the current trajectory, what we're going to see, I think, is if you're a Native person, right? What do you want to watch your children die from poisoned water like the Palestinian children for another few decades? Or do you want the Belt and Road Initiative to get you the infrastructure and the rail and the resources that you need when Canada's letting you burn and starve and be poisoned to death? Right? Now, it's not as bad as in Gaza because you literally can't even leave there, right? But if you are a native person, I mean, I think that what we're gonna see is, Canada might be forced into something. I think a lot of the United States might be forced if impoverished communities start going, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to work with the Chinese. The Chinese are selling a $10,000 home with 6G connectivity. You can drop it on any piece of land, disconnected, without paying any taxes to the U.S. government. You can be like out in the middle of indigenous land, or ideally working with the indigenous people to help liberate all people. But I can get a $10,000 fully furnished Chinese home, water, power, high-speed internet, TV, everything, 6G satellite. I can get a $3,000 electric car. I can live totally off-grid, disconnected from all American cities like Rome. Right? So you could have a non-generative AI 5G 6G Chinese-powered technological exodus of the metropoles: Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, DC. People suddenly not wanting to be involved, in this dying U.S. imperial project, or Toronto or Vancouver imperial project, or London project, or Parisian project. They'd be like, I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna build the North American Silk Road component with the native communities, because the United States and Canada, these Euro star-spangled Roman collapsing empires, are not going to provide the basic needs to the people. The Chinese are airdropping food and medical supplies now. Why am I going to sit around and wait for America to see if they can help me out? The Chinese I'm not even joking. The Chinese have a $5,000 electric car that can recharge, and it can go farther and faster than any Tesla. Why am I going to sit around and wait for America? Why am I going to wait to see if San Francisco gets better? I don't want to be stepping over the dead bodies of heroin overdose teachers in San Francisco. I'm going to leave San Francisco. I'm going to go to the rural areas of the Roman countryside with the assistance of the new Visigoths, but except they're much more based, called the Chinese. And the Chinese will help me go out there, because the Chinese care about Americans more than the American government, because the Chinese care about Canadians more than Justin Trudeau or the Conservatives. And that is actually the case. So, that should put the fire under the butt of the U.S. government. I heard that this week there was a big blow up. There's a lot of crying in D.C. and in London and in Ottawa. Everybody was, apparently there were suddenly people were like changing. The Palestine thing is really bringing to a head the internal contradictions of the liberal and conservative, but mostly liberal, because it's currently that's who's running a lot of the empire. The liberal classes that have run the United States under this fake we care about marginalized people, so-called rules-based order. They're suddenly having a lot of internal questions, right? I don't know if we can go behind Israel all the way, right? So, if the United States is capable of cleansing itself, then maybe what it is when it comes out of that, it can cut some deals into the Belt and Road. But the U.S. is not going to be able to build shit. But you see, people like Hillary Clinton, right? The Project for New American Century people, right? The Ursula von der Leyens, right? And people like Tony Blinken, right? These people that were fed and led by the continued Roman legacy of hegemony and supremacy and domination over all, right? They will have to, and white supremacy is part of that, right? They will have to, Roman supremacy, and then became British supremacy, European supremacy, Christian supremacy, white supremacy, American hegemony. They will have to give up their idea, this multi-thousand year idea that Europeans, Americans, white people are better. You gotta lose that one, because the Chinese are just concretely, empirically better than you in every way. Not that they're like not supreme, but they just are doing better in reforesting, greening, and everything. alleviating poverty, not being horrible, not starting wars, developmental paths to be model for the global South. Europe just fucking sucks. I'm sorry, but it's always been the case. It's just only becoming clear now because the pendulum is swinging back. That's the end of that. Thanks everybody for watching. It is don't forget Neofeud 2. Neofeud 2 is coming soon. Okay, that's the end of the Silver Spook going off without a script for 30 minutes. Neofeud 2 is coming soon. Don't forget to get Neofeud 1. These are some screenshots from Neofeud 2. I'm very close to being done with it. I promise. I was working on it yesterday and today. Speaking of imperialism, here's a video of what it looks like when the space galactic imperialists try to fight advanced civilizations that have far surpassed them. It kind of looks like this, sir. This is the actual little clip from inside the game, Neofeud 2. So all your American Star Destroyers, unfortunately, crash into your settlements because you miscalculated how advanced you were. Anyways, Neofeud is coming soon. Neofeud 1 supports everything that we do here at the Silver Spook Cooperative. Don't forget to pick it up. Also, you can get Neofeud on itch.io for Windows and Mac and for Linux. If you did enjoy Neofeud 1, don't forget if you can leave even a short review. It does massively help us to get the game discovered in the Steam algorithm because we really could use all the help. The more positive reviews we get, the more likely the game is to show up inside of the more like this and the searching functions when you are looking for games on Steam. It really helps. It's just how it is. Also consider getting Neofeud on itch.io. Like I said, it's for Windows and for Mac and for Linux. And it's also a game that you can give us maximum revenue when you get it through itch, so you can get it there. It really is. But you can get it wherever you can and when you want to get it. You can also get Decolonizers, where you kick capitalist colonizers' butts. And there's also, of course, Indigestar, where you are preventing empire from eradicating and plundering in a science fictional world that's like basically it's like Native Hawaiian experience filtered through 2001: A Space Odyssey, and maybe some Star Wars, obviously. You can also get Pigeon with Gun, where you play a pigeon with a gun fighting giant robot gajillionaires, and of course there's also Woman by Holly, that is about Holly was raised in right-wing evangelical Protestant Christianity, and this is Mary's perspective from within the Bible. That's about critiquing that kind of culture. You can also get Silver Spook. You can follow at Silver Spook Games at Mastodon.social, at Silver Spook Games at Octodon.social. On Mastodon, you can follow Silver Spook Guy, and there's also Silver Spook Games on Twitter. And you can also follow Terminus C, which is the account for Terminus Cyberstar, a cyberpunk immersive sim of late 90s PC games like Deus Ex and System Shock 2. It's developed in the style of those games, and I'm the content director and lead writer of this game. So if you like that, then do check out Terminus Cyberstar, and you can follow their Discord there, and then or join it. Follow Holly at the Tech Fairy. Holly is, of course, partner and wife here, producer and manager for KNX Twitch stream, music, and variety show, parent and caregiver here at the Silver Spook Cooperative. And also, Holly is also, of course, always educating, writing, and sharing important information. So don't forget to follow Holly as well. And thanks to all the Patreon patrons. Without your support, it makes it very difficult to do the work that we do. So thank you so much to all these people on the list. Who continue to help us to do our work here. Yeah. And don't forget, Neofeud is on sale. So if you've been thinking about getting it, you've been like wondering, oh, maybe I'll play this game, but I haven't have time or I don't have the money. It's only $4 and it's like a little over $4 on Steam and itch. So just run on skip over there and grab it, and it really does help us out. Okay, and that. Oh, also, I think I forgot. You can also give us a one-time donation through Ko-Fi if you don't play games, and of course, you can also support us with Patreon, like I said earlier. And when you become a Silver Spook Patreon, you get access to the behind-the-scenes of what we're working on, behind-the-scenes updates on Neofeud 2, and you get access to the Silver Spook Discord, which is lots of our cool friends and comrades there, and also you can get access to the Neofeud, the Silver Spook University, which is over 1,000 hours of all the content we've ever created, categorized by topics. So, yeah. Anyways, thanks a lot, everybody. I gotta go eat lunch because it's already 1. And until next time, keep your mirror shades polished, stay resilient, and try to keep the forest going, and don't replicate the errors of the previous empires. And we'll see you next time, or on Twitch around 6